Can you see the title slide?
Yep, you can see the title slide.
All good? All right, awesome. Thank you, guys.
All right.
Great. Let me take it now. Hey guys, my name is Jay. I'm lead product designer at Grab Singapore. As you can tell from my accent, I am not obviously from the region. I'm from America. I came to Grab 3 years ago in 2017. So today I'll be talking about the challenges and opportunities in times of a pandemic. Currently, I'm actually working on the safety trust team at Grab. So we are dealing with situations like this currently, especially in COVID times, of how to protect our drivers, our passengers, or our merchants, and especially when you're delivering food and whatnot. So with that being said, I do have some experience in that, but let me shoot through this presentation. If you have any questions, just either write them in the chat or just DM me. So as most of us know, right, all of us are dealing with the COVID situation, especially the pandemic. It's almost like they say in Game of Thrones, right? Winter's here, and luckily there is a dawn. It's coming, but it'll be slow before everything goes back to normal, right? Even though some countries like Vietnam and Singapore can control the virus a little bit better than most countries, you're still seeing outbreaks, right? And it's sort of a downer, especially in Jakarta, the Philippines in general. It's sort of a mess, and it's definitely ruined the holidays, definitely ruined the connections that we're usually used to, seeing friends or family and whatnot. But when you think about design and technology, especially in COVID, and I think most of you guys have seen this around on the internet, right? I think there's a lot of challenges and opportunities when it comes to digital transformation. And obviously, the answer is COVID when you think about this in general. And there is a lot of positive things, especially if you're in the design world, especially right now. The world's going to recover through digital in general. Everything is going to be digitized. Everyone's moving to the digital world. That's only going to benefit us designers and anyone that's in the tech realm in general. And it can be seen, and I have data here. I don't want to bore you guys with charts, but it can be seen that most countries are now digitizing quicker than before. And it's amazing what a pandemic can do and shift all that attention to the design and tech world. And it's only going to benefit us, as I mentioned before. And like I said, leadership is taking a good look at this, and they are agreeing that everything is now shifting towards that realm of technology and innovation. And if you're a designer, it's a great time to be a designer right now. And even though COVID, started in Asia, obviously there's early indications that containment, protocols are resuming economic activity, and that's very true with Singapore in general. But for Asia in general as a whole, I think we're going to see Asia's time to shine, especially in the design and tech realm. And why is that, right? So there's a few things when you think about Asia that they've done better than most of the world, whether it's contactless commerce with delivery, rethinking the social contract, especially in Singapore, right? Tracking movement, enforcing quarantines if people are exposed to COVID, or letting you know if you're near someone that's exposed to COVID. Governments, trying to sustain consumer business confidence by, benefiting or giving them a budget to survive, right? Asia's obviously gone to the realm of going on Zoom a lot and embracing that. A lot of new offerings are now coming out of Asia, especially in the technology realm, whether it's e-commerce or new platforms for your company to be on, engaging with new partners and platforms. And design thinking has definitely moved beyond just the screen. I think there's a lot of holisticness that's happening, and I'll keep repeating that through this presentation in general, because holistic design is something that most people are gonna definitely feel more impactful than just the screen that you guys are designing on. But like I said, there are challenges when you are going through a pandemic like this, right? There's changing habits. Everyone feels isolated, right? So obviously we're meeting on Zoom. It's sort of a bummer, but not to see you guys in person, but this is unfortunately the way things are, right? So we have to learn how to scale digitally as a team and as designers in general. So, we're so used to getting food by hand or having someone hand us the food, but now obviously it's definitely contactless where people leave food at the doorstep. You either go out and get the food. So how do you design around that experience in general? A lot of the social norms, right? You're so used to going to large events and seeing everybody next to you, your friends or your family in general. But now there's this space in between that we can't really, obviously get close to somebody or hug somebody or, shake their hand. It's very different. It's definitely a new norm. So what are the touch points as someone that's in tech or design that you have to understand or where things are changing for this new norm? You have to consciously keep this in mind, right? Whether it's in food delivery or person-to-person contact, how do you make this experience better? And of course, like most of us are working from home, right? We're so used to working with people, whether it's at a studio or company in the office. But now this is probably our setup at home, right? Whether it's our laptop on Zoom, maybe having like iPhone or iPad, and just watching maybe Netflix or whatever. It's complex, right? And the tipping points have definitely made us change our daily habit from what it was in general. But there's no need to panic, right? There's no need to be fretting about this. I think we're adjusting nicely as the world is adjusting to a pandemic, as most people know. But there are a few questions that you guys should keep in mind when you're designing, especially in a pandemic, and the challenges that I'm going to bring up. So a question that you should be asking yourself when you're designing, right? Is the experience that you're designing a crisis response? And what does that mean? Well, it's like how companies pivot in general. A crisis response is more or less asking yourself, okay, this is a response, something that we have to do quickly and we have to get rapid findings immediately, right? So what does that look like? Getting a rapid feedback on an experience or getting rapid feedback on a flow. You need that right away, especially if someone is getting food delivery. How do you change that habit, right? Instead of having that person deliver the food hand by hand, how do you deliver food? So that's a crisis response in general. And most crisis response are very quick. They pivot, as I mentioned before, and how that looks like and how you can get rapid findings in general to pivot, right, is maybe using like tools like Maze in general to get rapid feedback, where you send a prototype to people, especially if it's in the digital realm. Physical, obviously, that's a little bit different. I'll talk about that later. But in the digital realm, if you're pivoting really quickly, Maze is a great tool to get findings really quickly and send out a prototype to your users to pivot away from the daily norm that you guys might be used to, especially in the pandemic, right? And Maze is a great tool. If you haven't used it, it gives you feedback. You can ask as many questions as you want. I'm not trying to be a sponsor for Maze, but it's awesome. We use this at Grab. And it's been a great tool for us to do user research and get rapid assessment on our experiences in general so we can pivot and go forward. Same with Google surveys. Obviously, they're very effective just as Maze, but Maze has the prototype aspect to it, which is awesome. And of course, having Zoom videos definitely work. So what does like a rapid crisis response mean, especially when you have to rapidly pivot, right? Well, a rapid response is possibly testing, right? So someone thought about this strategically, designed this out where you have to rapid test people in person or maybe at the hospital in general. Or if you're a gamer, a rapid response would be what's happening with the Cyberpunk game, which is such a letdown, but now they're letting people get refunds on a game that's so buggy, right? So that's a quick pivot. That's a crisis response when something goes wrong and you have to alleviate the experience for the people that are in that experience, right? So that's a crisis response. A contingency response, right, is something that's more planned out. And I think most of us at every company do this, right? We strategically think about the future. We have a plan. We think about these in phases. We identify the problem, and then we do more or less some research, and then we slowly plan out how we're gonna make this flow work for people, whether it's consumers, businesses, merchants, and whatnot. It's more of a long-term strategic response and experience flow that it's long-term. It's not a quick pivot like a crisis response, right? So what does a contingency response look like? Well, obviously, when I talk about contingency responses, they're well planned, they're researched, they take time to go out to the public. So Obviously in America, they've been experimenting with, robot delivery, which is becoming definitely a thing now because of the COVID situation. And then here in Southeast Asia, Foodpanda is actually experimenting with drone delivery. And obviously this is not out yet, but as I mentioned, it is a contingency response where they're testing, the limits of drone delivery. And obviously they have to deal with, compliance and regulations, but it is something that designers like us will have to take part in and think about going into the future, especially with the pandemic right now. So there are opportunities out there in general, but these are some questions that you want to ask yourself. Same with, restaurants, right? People actually thought about like, okay, how far people should be far apart. If you think about it, this is all designed in general, so along with the strategy of like keeping people, healthy and not exposed to COVID, especially in restaurants or facilities in general. And then same with obviously the signs that you see in Singapore. We have these tokens that we have to carry around and that trace us and we can check in with all around. Obviously, contingency response was also contactless delivery, which I mentioned before, where people just leave delivery at your doorstep or on your doorknob. And then in Thailand, they actually use these foot pedals to actually pick the floor that you want to go to on an elevator, which is pretty interesting. So again, they probably tested this type of stuff. It took, obviously in a pandemic, it took quicker than usual, but there's a contingency strategy behind it, right? So it was designed in a way people thought about these things. So that's a contingency response. So when you're designing about these experiences, not just on digital, but in the physical realm, what does that look like? What does that look like long-term, especially if you're in a pandemic? So as I mentioned, there's opportunities out there. So you have to think about these things holistically. But that being said, right, I think all of us are in a state of regression, especially with emotions, not being able to travel, not being able to possibly see our family or friends like me. I'm stuck here in Singapore. I can't go back to America, so it's sort of a mess. But when I talk about regression in this type of regard, I think when you're a designer or you're a researcher or anyone that's in tech, you have to think about the human emotions, especially that people are going through. So I like to relate to this study that was done on cancer patients done in hospitals. And why is that? Well, the typical reaction of someone that is a cancer patient is when they find out they have cancer, there's 3 levels of, feeling pretty much, helpless in general, right? There's emotional grief, there's anxiety, despair, anger. And when the person regresses into that really bad state, or as you find out you have cancer and your cancer gets worse, your emotions get less empathetic. We decrease, become more aggressive, and we're definitely more self-centered in general, right? And there's this table I tabled out with, the emotions that we all feel or may feel, especially when, you may be under duress. And no, this is not just related to cancer patients, but pretty much related to anyone that's emotional in general, right? So I won't read them out, but obviously it affects your attention, your memory, and your behavior in general. So as designers, we have to take that into account when we're designing these experiences, whether they're on digital or in physical, right? And as I mentioned, right, there are 3 different levels when someone is in a crisis, especially humans, right? There's a level 1 where they can't think straight, they're self-centered, they're tunnel vision, as I mentioned. There's a level 2 where they're apprehensive about the experience. They may not want to dip into it, but they see it, they know they're aware of it in general. And there's a level 3 that's probably like most of us right now, where we're pretty understanding, we're relaxed, we're not so, dug in our heels on or focused on something right now at this very moment. So when I've given this talk before, right, not everyone is in crisis, but what I'm trying to say is you have to understand and have empathy for these people that may be in a worse situation that you guys are in. So everyone's adapting to the new normal, especially the digital new normal. So how do you leave an imprint or an experience with the user? It's not just about the digital screen that you guys are looking at or experiencing. It's about the physical realm of someone, that is dealing with going maybe to the hospital and they have to check in. How do you make that easy? How do you make that seamless? Because before, obviously, it was you just walk in, but how do you make it more seamless in general? And as I mentioned, right, because in the end, your experience leaves an impression online and offline. And what does that look like? So in Japan, obviously Japan's been through a lot of, disasters, like the tsunami that happened in the maybe 2010s, right? Many companies, they in Japan in general, they focus on customer centricity. Same with Grab, and I'm not trying to promote Grab, but when the tsunami struck Japan, the CEO of Lawson in general, if you don't know of Lawson, it's very similar to like a hyper like 7-Eleven. It's like a market, but Lawson, what they did, the CEO of Lawson, they actually shipped supplies to these areas that were impacted by tsunami. And what that did was impact the person's experience with Lawson's in general. The fact that, oh, cool, this company cares about me, cares about the despair that I'm in, that leaves an imprint on the person. So don't just think about the digital realm, but what affects the person physically, right? If they're in torment or they're in a natural disaster, like a new tsunami just destroyed their town, and the fact that your company is actually shipping supplies and taking care of them in general, that is a way of taking care of your customers, taking care of your users. And that leaves an imprint on them. Hey, I'm gonna come back to this product. I'm gonna support them because they supported me in dire need. And as I mentioned, right, not everyone is in crisis, but you have to think about how your brand, how your experience leaves that imprint on this person, online and offline. So here are some quick design principles to keep in mind in general. And I'll roll through these quickly because I know I'm running out of time. So in general, when you're designing, right, you want to prioritize. This is clear cut, right? Everyone's time is a premium. You don't want to waste your user's time or your team's time. Prioritize your features, especially when you are designing right now. I think you guys need to be very careful and look at the metrics, look at the data, what makes a bigger impact for the user or your company, right? Instead of just features that may be like more visual or making your product look more beautiful, aesthetics, right? You want to focus on experiences that really make an impact for you and your business in general. Frictionless. So what I mean by frictionless, well, as I mentioned, right, this is a good example, right? You don't want to just have this person struggle in adding an item, right? Because this person has to literally just drag this item all the way to the basket, and that causes some friction, right? What if the person messes up or drags outside of a box and it automatically doesn't get added on? This is not a good example of making an experience frictionless. It's definitely, there's a lot of friction in that. It takes time, right? So you can see it's just, I mean, it's nice, but it's not going to win you or get like the high volume of people to add items or, you know, increase GMV, you know, the terms that people in business or product will look like. I mean, it's beautiful, but this is definitely, there's a lot of friction in adding items. And, you know, same goes for payments. This is super easy when you tap with your phone or your watch. And then, of course, having these conversations, right, with your team. And you don't want to just be siloed in conversations. You want to make sure all the stakeholders are included in that conversation, especially when you're making decisions. So when I talk about frictionless, it's not about design, but it's about making decisions. So for focused, right, what do I mean by focus? When you're designing, focus on the touch points, especially the touch points that your product looks like or hits, especially your design. So what do I mean by that? Well, there are multiple touch points, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or is it an area where you can just focus your product on? So DD has this great area where you can reach all your safety features in general. It's in one area. It's great. It's very focused, and you know where to find it, especially with the plus and shield sign. And what I mean by focus as well, on a personal level, block out days to work and focus on your work. So we've done this at Grab. I used to work at Pinterest. We have our Wednesdays blocked out for calendar. Have that day to yourself to work and not just focus on work. So you don't have those meetings that, you know, come in and wreck your day, right? Those are not fun in general. Encourage, right? Encourage your users to do stuff or encourage users to interact with your design. So Lyft has these awesome micro animations that you just want to look at and play with in general. So encourage your users. Same with the content, right? Make sure your content also encourages users to interact with it. So this is Swiggy and Grubhub. So it's great content to add, like promos in general. So encourage users to interact with your designs and get their attention. And then on top of that, encourage your team. I think this is one thing a lot of us really are bad at, like especially companies right now, we are all isolated. So encourage your team, send them DMs, messages to encourage them. Hey, you're doing a good job. Words of affirmation, get their back and support them. Efficiency. So what does that look like? How do you make your experience efficient? This is pretty clear cut, right? So you can see on the left, practice social distancing. It's less clear, but make it more efficient and more clear, right? Stay at home, get groceries once per week. So you can see the difference. It's very there's clearer content and communication towards the user. So think about that when you're designing, especially when you're looking at content. And then Zoom's looking about making more efficient on their app, throwing all these Slack, Asana, Dropbox into a super app for productivity. So make your experiences more efficient in general. Holistic. So I've mentioned this a couple of times, right? So we have contact tracing here, and now soon it's going to be used to possibly show as like a check-in for your immunity or vaccine certificates through airports. So that was thought about strategically, and it's a holistic experience. So it may not just be checking into a place, but it may be actually showing that you've been vaccinated. So think holistically with your experiences in general. Accessibility. Don't just focus on one person. This comic obviously talks about pretty well. It's focused on this one person. No one's gonna jump on that tightrope to cross the bridge. But when it's open to other people, everyone's gonna obviously use your experience. And this is true on Apple, and it's true with video games. So Xbox has done a great job with their Xbox controller to make it more accessible for people to play video games. Hyperlocalism. So if you've seen my talk before, I talk about hyperlocalizing your content, hyperlocalizing your design system that includes different languages, different currencies, and whatnot. If I'm rushing, it is because I'm rushing, so apologize. Also, think about like the countries that may use the older phones, or think about Wi-Fi as a precious commodity, right? And then obviously think about the religions or things that may impact your users in general. Build connections. So what does that look like? Obviously, e-commerce has become a big thing on live TikToks or Instagram in general. People are selling stuff on there. So that's how you build connections. Think about how you want to get people's attention and how to interact with them in general. Tinder's done a good job with this choose your own adventure to connect with people. And if someone picks something, they tell you the choices that they've picked, like save the puppy, stay in the moment, and then you can actually match with this person, talk about the decisions that you made. So build connections in your experience. And then of course, like sports, they have these Zoom videos now people can attend through Zoom. So I want to be more closer to my team. How do you do that? Well, they did it through Zoom, which is pretty cool. And then lastly, remove barriers. I think this is important in general. I think when you remove barriers in your experience, how do you make it more open? So Instacart is a marketplace where you can just buy food or grocery material, but now they made it open to other retail stores like Best Buy, where you can actually buy electronics, which is pretty cool. So they made their platform wide open. So remove the barriers, make it easier for your users. AR is coming back, especially when you can try on your own shoes, which is pretty cool in this is an experience. Obviously, gyms are doing a good job of this, especially on the video calls that you can join now and just work out with your fitness trainer. And then IKEA is doing a good job with implementing AR and showcasing like where furniture can fit in general. And soon we can possibly have holograms, which is pretty wild. So this is the future, and there's a lot of opportunities in general. So the leaner and faster and more adaptable you are, the better chances you'll be able to navigate the crisis. And it's true. And the opportunities are endless. And history suggests, right, anyone that innovates through crisis is definitely going to outperform during the recovery. So there's a lot of opportunity out there, especially with us designers. And I want you guys to take that in, especially in Asia. I think it's a very good time to be in Asia. Everything's going digital. So don't be so negative about it, even though it is a dark time right now, especially for everybody that's involved. But there is hope and there's horizon. And designers, strategists, and researchers are definitely part of that. And we make that stool. I like this photo in general. Designers, researchers, strategists make these 3 legs of this chair And in general, this chair is that seat at the table that people talk about in general. So we have the opportunity to make the change and make an impact right now. And I think it's a great time to be in any of these professions right now. And I want to leave you guys with this quote: "The future belongs to the bold and clever." So I hope you guys can take that into heart. Thank you for coming to the talk. I appreciate being invited. Thank you guys so much.
Okay, nice. I really enjoyed. So, do we have any question to Jay before we proceed to the next section? If anyone, if there is not, I do have some question. I'm just gonna give it a few minutes. But before we wait for the question to come in, I have one question. So I've been going through the talk and I'm seeing like a lot of the key point is like taking actions and be the person who is innovative and come up with very interesting idea, or which is what you say, be bold, right? But what kind of advice can you give for people who are working in a startup and they do not have the luxury of a big team, or they are not a very main person who make this kind of decision? How can we as a designer able to push to that point? And
yeah, great question, David. I've been in that position, so especially in startups. I think one thing, because I didn't spend enough time on it because I'm rushing a little bit, I think you need to build those soft skills and communicate and build those alliances. I know people they see it as politics, but in general, you need to develop these relationships, whether it's engineers, your product leaders, your CEO, whoever it is that are like your higher stakeholders. Talk to them, educate them, show them options, right? Because show them what's out there, show them what competitors are doing, because they're so busy, focused on numbers, probably looking at business. They may be listening to someone else that may have their ear, but you need to show them, know what works, what hasn't worked, show them the metrics, work with your PA or data analytics. If you don't have that, get involved with these different teams. I think it helps to build those alliances. I was as a startup and I actually worked closely with the business team and got numbers from the business team, and I made sure to put them near my design mock-up as a call out, like, hey, we are increasing GMV if we do this, if we get people to click on this button. Right? So that's one way to do it in general. I mean, obviously there are other ways, but in general, you need to develop those soft skills to work with people. I know designers tend not to like talking to people, especially in Southeast Asia. I've that definitely a cultural thing. But if you want to make an impact, I think learn to really make those relationships count and really connect with the people that actually have the decision power, right? And that's important.
nice. Okay, we have one question coming from Zoe Chi. So what are the changes, adaptation that Grab have made during COVID? What would be a great example if you can share a real life example?
Yeah. So there's a few. I think, and you guys may have seen it on the platform because I worked for Grab Food for 2.5 years at Grab, and that was actually part of that whole big redesign. I think when the pandemic first started and we started realizing, oh crap, it's like to Southeast Asia, it's impacting Singapore and Indonesia and a bunch of other countries. I think the biggest pivot we had to do was contactless commerce. When the driver actually leaves the food at your door, and that was the biggest adaptation. That was the hardest. I think that was the biggest one, and I think the other one was also alcohol delivery. I think the fact that the driver, originally we intended to actually have the driver, well, it depends on the country. In Vietnam, the driver could look at your ID, and then obviously COVID definitely messed everything up because now the driver can't look at it. So we had to make it easier for the driver to get your identification. And you may be spooked by that, right? And this is something that comes up in every talk, especially when I talk with Westerners. Everyone's like, why would you give your identity out to your government, or why would you have the government trace you, right? But when you think about it, right, it's very individualistic, the Western thinking, versus the collectivism that is Asia, right, or Southeast Asia, where we are trying to take care of each other and make sure that we're not harmed. But aside from that, the driver, we made it easier for the driver to look at the identity and the verification. obviously there was a lot of safety concerns in that because we don't want, person's name fully to the person, but it is government regulations. We have to do some trade-offs. It gets complicated. And then some other adaptions, I'm sure you may have seen Grab Protect, which is something that I'm not directly part of, but if you've seen it, we've had to start notifying, not just our passengers, but our drivers how to take care of themselves and notify passengers that, hey, the drivers are safe, they have masks on, they clean their car, and we have to communicate that to you guys in general, passengers. So that was very difficult. I think that was probably the hardest thing to adapt to because there's multiple teams. We have to work with the operations team, the business team, and we had to educate people. And I think the hardest thing that I kept mentioning in the talk was, we think about just the screen that we designed for, the mobile screen, but you also have to think about like the physicalness of like someone coming into a car, and you have to let them know if they're not looking at the screen, how do you let them know that, we are keeping them safe? So we actually, developed these placards that we put in cars in the beginning of in the pandemic, where we let people know that, hey, these are all the steps that the drivers are doing, take care of themselves, you are. So that was a big pivot away from the normal. And then I think people were more accustomed, like, hey, this is great. Grab's thinking about not just, what I see on the screen, but the physical aspect. I think that change of, designing holistically, as I kept mentioning, definitely makes a difference. And you see it with like contact tracing, right? Like you have to check in with a QR code, but obviously, you're tracked, and if they find out you get COVID, they let you know, and you should be technically safe, or you just quarantine, right? But I think there is a benefit of designing holistically, not just online but offline. That's why I kept bringing that up.
Nice. Okay, do we have one? I think we have one more question before we end this one. If no, then probably I would ask that question. Oh,